A huge percentage of India is living without, living with just the tiniest income, that the potential for a demagogue to seize government power and appeal to the poverty-stricken masses. I'll give you everything, just be my followers. So sometimes it's said about India that worry is there. And as you know, Marx had his theory about the proletariat, the poverty-stricken workers or persons out of work. They are going to rise up from the low class and overturn governments. But actually, we're explaining in my report how social scientists have discovered who is actually causing the commotion in the past 2 years in the world. In the Middle East, in Brazil, in Ukraine, who's causing all the trouble? It's the middle class. Because they work hard to get to their middle class position, and then they want more. We've got this much, we should get more. It's the nature of material desire. These social scientists were bewildered, thinking that if people would attain the middle class level, then automatically they would become satiated and they would be very cooperative and easy to govern because we've made it to the middle class. But as you know, there's a flaw in this theory, which any devotee would be able to point out. There's no satiation with material desires. The mistake was their thinking. You become middle class and you become a nice citizen of the government. For democracy, it is necessary to be a middle class. They're nicely established. They'll have faith in democratic processes. They will be the stability of the country. But again, the flaw. Material desires are never satiated. The more you get, the more you want. So what's happened throughout the world is that the middle class, instead of being so pro-democratic and nice and peaceful and stabilizing, they're totally unstable because they want more. Okay, I've got a good home now, but look around. What about the infrastructure? Where's the transportation system that's improving? What about the schools? How are they improving? So they never get enough. You can't become peaceful. It is not possible by performing material activities, which are a contamination in and of themselves, that you'll be peaceful and satisfied. And not only that, it's not only that the middle class is looking for more, they're also fearful about losing what they have. Psychologists call this the fear of falling back. We've established ourselves, and now what's happening? The economy is crumbling, the job market is drying up. What's going to happen to our children? So they get uptight and angry, and they cause commotions. Yes, they might have been poor before, or their parents were poor, lived in the village. Now they've made it to the middle class. And so when they lose that economic privilege, that economic status, they become very angry. So we were pointing out in Mayapur that Krishna uses this material tendency to make an example about how he treats his pure lovers. You didn't have me, and now you have me. But then you lose me. What are you going to think about all the time? You'll be thinking about me even more. So that was Krishna's defense to the gopis. I know you're not ordinary devotees. You're not in the sadhaka class. So I didn't disappear from you just so you would feel humble and in that way become purified of lust and anger, thinking, we are useless, we didn't even get a drop of Krishna's mercy. I have to try harder to elevate myself. I know you're not in that category. But even though one may be in the category of prema, with attachment, I want to increase that attachment. But the acharyas point out that the gopis protested even that one. Okay, you don't consider us ordinary sadhakas, but are you saying that you consider us to be ordinary prem bhaktis? That you have to do what you did to increase our attachment? In other words, aren't we good enough for you? Haven't we shown our unlimited attachment? What makes you think, in other words, what makes you think that you have to contrive these situations just to increase our attachment? Do you understand how unlimited our attachment is? In other words, we're not ordinary premis. We're not sadhakas, we're not ordinary premis. We are the gopis, and look what you've done. So, at that point, Krishna admitted defeat. Yes, you're not ordinary pure lovers. So, here's the real thing. Here's the real reason. I apparently disappeared from you in order that your pure love would become celebrated. I did it for the benefit of everyone else, so they would see the spotless nature, Ruddha Bhava, of your love. And secondly, I have to admit that by doing this, I've become indebted. I put myself in debt to you. So at that point, the gopis realized, actually, he has defeated us, he's conquered us. They realized he has arranged a situation in which he is in debt to us. So in this way, the standard of pure love, like a priceless gem, is polished, polishes, shines brighter, shines brighter. When you can see clearly that the absolute standard for judging actions is Krishna's sense gratification, then everything about the spiritual and material world becomes clear. In the 4th chapter of the Adi Leela of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami makes a great effort to establish that the way you judge an action is how it contributes towards the absolute standard. And the absolute standard is Krishna's sense gratification. Material life means my sense gratification, gross or subtle, that's the standard. Even the subtlest desire, what am I going to get out of this? How am I feeling? That's why the sadhus at Maharaj Nabi's yajna were a little concerned. This is kind of embarrassing, kind of childish. We're disturbing the Supreme Personality of Godhead just because he wants a son. Why doesn't he just be satisfied? When the Lord wants to reveal himself to him, he will. But anyway, we did the yajna. They're thinking like that. And then Atri Muni, he wanted a son as good as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Nevertheless, the Supreme Lord appeared. Still, Kaviraj Goswami takes great effort to establish what is real bhakti. In spite of Krishna's being kind and merciful to his devotees who have a tinge of material desire, still, Kaviraj Goswami wants to give you the full mercy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by so extraordinarily establishing what is pure bhakti. Not Atmendriya Priti. The standard is not what is dear for my senses. The standard is Krishnendriya Priti, what is dear to Krishna's senses. And because the gopis specialize in what is dear to Krishna's senses, the principle in Vrindavan is Krishna Sukha Hetu. Again and again, Kaviraj Goswami uses that term. The Hetu, the cause, is Krishna's Sukha, Krishna's happiness. That's the guiding principle. That's the be-all and end-all. Just like in first canto of Bhagavatam, it is stated, H.H.DEvamrita. Pure bhakti has no material hetu, no material motivation or cause, and therefore there's no interruption. As soon as there's material cause or motivation, there must be an interruption in the service. So Kaviraj Goswami is revealing the principle of Vrindavan. Krishna Sukha Hetu. There is a Hetu, there is a cause, there's a motivation, but it's 100% Krishna Sukha, Krishna's happiness. So then he begins to describe from 3 different angles the gopis' pure love for Krishna. He says, look at how they decorate themselves, how they dress themselves, how they take care of their hair. There's not a slightest tinge of vanity in that. They're simply doing it because they consider they belong to Krishna. And so 100% their personal decorations are done simply for Krishna's pleasure so that Krishna can enjoy seeing them. And then he gives another example, that Krishna's dearest devotees, they're not thinking, how can they enjoy Krishna's presence? They don't even think of their own happiness. They're not doing anything for their own happiness. They're doing everything for the happiness of Krishna. Yet, even though they don't want any happiness for themselves, Krishna forces happiness upon them. So this is the paradox of pure love, the Rudha Bhava. Although they have not the slightest desire for their own happiness, not the slightest concern. This is inconceivable for us. Not the slightest concern for your own personal pleasure? Not the slightest. Yet, Krishna reciprocates and forces happiness upon them. This, Srila Prabhupada writes, is the paradox. It doesn't make sense on the material platform. How you can 100% live just for someone else's pleasure and not in the slightest worry about your own pleasure, and yet that other person is imposing happiness upon you. So Kaviraj Goswami resolves the paradox by saying, you simply have to conclude that the happiness of Krishna's dearest devotees is 100% lying simply in the happiness of Krishna. And then thirdly, he points out, a real devotee protests when his or her own happiness in bhakti, his or her own ecstasy interferes with service. Even when the premananda, the pleasure of pure love of Krishna, is there and it interferes with the seva, the devotee criticizes the premananda. The 2 examples given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu about Daruka, Krishna's chariot driver. He's fanning Krishna and ecstasy is overcoming him. His limbs are becoming stunned with ecstasy. But how can he fan if his limbs are frozen in ecstasy? So he became critical of that ecstasy, that premananda, for the sake of the seva. The other example given in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu is Krishna's dearest devotee, Srimati Radharani. The ecstasy was blurring her vision as tears filled her eyes, and she was unable to see Krishna properly, and in that way she felt her service was being impeded. So she criticized that ecstasy. So that is Kaviraj Goswami's 3rd presentation of the spotless love of Krishna's dearest devotees. He gives vivid examples to illustrate the principle of Krishnendriya Priti. The ultimate absolute standard for judging everything is not piety, it's not religious belief, it's not Loka Veda. knowledge of local customs and traditions. It's not Kula Dharma, family principles. It's not charity, welfare work. It's not deeds of sacrifice for the nation, for this material cause, for that material cause. In every case, the absolute standard is simply Krishnendriya Priti, Krishna's sense gratification. That means that unless we understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the supreme enjoyer, we can never understand what is the real criterion, the real standard for judging what is a good action and what is a bad action. That's why Lord Chaitanya rejects any material consideration of what is good, what is bad. Manodharma, he says, mental speculation. Looking at something that is not 100% centered on Krishna's sense gratification, looking at that and saying, well, this is good, this is bad. No. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, by his words and actions, illuminated the principle of 100% everything for Krishna's pleasure. In that way, we have the highest goal to strive for. And in striving for that goal, we become purified. Even in our stage of practicing devotee, we feel Krishna is not present to me. I had some experience, some realizations of the blessings of Krishna, of the spiritual master of the devotees, but it's been a while since I've received any such transcendental incentive. What's going on? So when we know what the goal is, then we can appreciate how Krishna deals with us in all circumstances of life. And we have full conviction that Krishna knows 100% what is best for us and how to deal with us. Hare Krishna. Any questions?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, you mentioned that the combination of fresh enthusiasm of young devotees and material wisdom of older devotees, that is the best combination. What is the meaning of material wisdom of older devotees?
Mature wisdom. Mature wisdom of older devotees. Older devotees have a wealth of experience. They've seen so many things. They've seen cycles, they've seen phases. So one should take advantage of that, tap into that bank of knowledge and experience. In other words, we shouldn't try to reinvent the wheel. Discuss with older devotees how the wheel has already been invented. So what is their experience? How the wheel can spin better. But that new, fresh enthusiasm of young devotees is very contagious. It's very energizing, and that's also necessary. So the best combination, the best thing is to combine the both. So when you have a devotee community full of youthful enthusiasm and mature, experienced wisdom, and that is a very successful devotional community.
Just before that, you mentioned that older devotees tend to become cynical.
They can tend to become cynical. Older devotees, yes, can. It is possible, not automatically. Oh, they can. We've seen this temple president. We've seen that temple president. We've seen the brahmacharis. We've seen the grihastas. We know what's going to happen. Older devotees can tend to be like that. But especially if they do outreach work and also are involved with training younger devotees, you become so amazed by the freshness of the bhakti experience. So for older devotees, it's very important that they care and train for younger devotees, and also they do outreach. In that way, they're always in contact on a daily basis with the miracle of bhakti. So as I said, the best is that both are there, and then you have a very successful devotional community.
You had mentioned the possibility of older devotees becoming cynical.
I must have been talking about myself.
But also we read that as we become more and more attracted to spiritual life, we must become callous to material activities, material life. So how do we prevent that callousness towards material pains and pleasures from seeping into our devotional interactions?
That is a good question. And from my own experience, that is resolved by internal endeavor. You actually have an internal yearning. You're begging Krishna, please let me always see the miracle of bhakti. You're working on the relationship. You don't want to take anything for granted. That takes an inner commitment, because as the years go by, we may become mechanical. I'm a veteran. I've seen it all, been through it all, and I'm surviving. Yes, there is great credit for someone who's a survivor in devotional service. I remember sometimes amongst older devotees, we sort of refer to older devotees who've been through a lot, we say, and they're still standing in bhakti. We say, he's a survivor, she's a survivor. So there's great credit to that. But we want to be more than survivors, battle-hardened survivors. We want to be always fascinated by the glories of bhakti, the glories of devotees. And that does take an internal effort. Beg the deities for that empowerment, that you can always swim and float in the ocean of devotees with a sense of wonder, with a sense of excitement. It does take an internal commitment. It's often nothing that we can generate on our own. We have to beg for it. And especially when you're an older devotee, you don't like begging for anything. Come on, I've been around 30 or 40 years. I should get my due without begging. But Krishna knows how to bring us all to our knees, so to speak. We never give up being a beggar. And so that ability to not become jaded as an older devotee, it requires some internal effort.
Maharaj, you mentioned that when Maharaj Navi was doing a sacrifice in order to get a son, when the Lord appeared, the sages who were engaged in that sacrifice felt some embarrassment and inconvenience the Lord for this ostensibly material desire. And then you resolved that the Lord still appeared on his kindness, which was a resolution to that. Why would the Lord reciprocate with somebody's material desire? My question is, in this verse, they're glorifying Mahanavi, and they're saying that by his Shuddha karma, by his pure devotion, the Lord became his son. So it would appear that the same group, I'm assuming it's relatively the same group of sages, they're from the same family of sages. One of them was embarrassed by the fact that he was looking for the Lord to become his son. The other group now, after the fact, is glorifying him, and they're indicating a causative relationship because they say Shudhena karma na, by his pure karma, indicating that it was by that activity that the Lord appeared, which would go against the principle, not necessarily, but on some level, that there was something wrong with his previous desire. Could you please help me resolve that?
Yes, Bhagavatam presents things from different angles. It's like taking a gem and holding it up to the light and looking at different facets. So the sages were embarrassed, not only for Mars Nabi, but they considered themselves to be ordinary brahmanas of fruitive activity. But look at what happened. By their purity, by the sages' purity, the Supreme Personality of Godhead appeared. So it's showing humility. And it's also showing that, yes, from one angle, you could say Nabi was flawless. Yet from another angle, well, maybe there's a little pinch of something that needed to be resolved. So the Bhagavatam is always taking the gem and shifting it in the light so you see different facets. It's very deep. So from one point of view, yes, Shudhena Karmana, pure execution in devotional service. From another angle, yeah, a little something that... Here's an example. Sudama Brahmana, Krishna's friend. He went to Dwarka, ostensibly to ask for some financial support from Krishna. That's what his wife was concerned with. Is the wife subject to being critiqued? No, she was simply thinking of the welfare of her husband. But it could appear that she was saying, go see your old friend Krishna, get some money. But remember, she was more stricken with hunger than her husband, because she would take whatever little food came their way, she'd give it all to her husband, and she wouldn't have anything. So she's actually thinking of her husband's welfare. But it could seem that she was telling her husband, go see Krishna to fulfill material desires. And her husband was very reluctant because of that. I never asked Krishna for anything. So, you know what happened. In Dwarka, he saw the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Krishna snatched the chip rice out of his hand. And what was Sudama Brahmana thinking on his way home after he left the palace of Rukmini? He was still as poverty-stricken as before, but what is he thinking? The wonder. We talked about the wonder today. How amazing is this? I, an imitation Brahmana, a sinful person, have been embraced by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. How wonderful this is. Amazing. That was his thought. He was just in a daze of wonder. And then he said something very interesting. It is further wonderful that Krishna didn't give me anything. That is proof of his mercy upon me. He didn't give me one penny, because if he knew if I get the slightest bit of wealth, I'll fall down. So this is further symptom of my Lord's greatness. Didn't give me anything. What would we have said in those circumstances? I've been serving for 20, 30, 40 years, performing severe austerities, tolerating so many devotees misunderstanding me, tolerating so much lack of notice of my great efforts. we complain. But Sudama Brahmana, his angle was how loving my Lord is. He knew me. He knew the slightest opulence, I'd fall down. How wonderful he is. He didn't give me anything. Of course, when he got home, it was a bit of a surprise. Now, what was Krishna thinking? Krishna in Dwarka, in Rukmini's palace, was thinking, he's given me this chip rice. Actually, Krishna had to snatch it from him. I have nothing in my wealth that could properly repay him. Therefore, I have to wait until he leaves the palace and gets home to give him something, because I'm embarrassed. Nothing I have in my possession can properly compensate him for his bhakti. And that bhakti is demonstrated in those few chipped rice grains that I ate. I have nothing. I'm defeated. I'm embarrassed. I can't reciprocate with my devotee enough. So therefore, I'll do it on the sly. I'll wait till he leaves, because I can't face him. I can't reciprocate with him. The example the acharyas give is like a farmer does yajna very devotedly so that there'll be rain on his land. So the rain is embarrassed. This farmer is performing such nice yajnas so that I'll rain, but I can't properly repay him or reciprocate with him. So what I'll do, I won't rain during the day. I'll rain at night while he's sleeping. That way I won't show my face during the day, so to speak. So that's the acharya's explanation for why Krishna did not compensate Sudama Brahmana with anything. It seemed like no devotee cared. And Sudama, as we said, was exulting in that. I didn't get anything from him. That's the greatest thing. But as you know, he got home and there was opulence rivaling that of Indra. So, the acharyas point out that, yes, Sudama Brahmana, associate of Krishna in Krishna's childhood when they were both in the Gurukula. Obviously, he's not a normal devotee. Obviously, he's on an extraordinary platform. Yet, Krishna detected a little attachment. What was Sudama's little attachment? He was attached to being a renounced Brahmana. He was attached to being austere. But this is very subtle. You can't really make a big thing out of it. Yet it's there in a microscopic way. So Krishna said, all right, you're so attached to being a renounced austere Brahmana? Ha ha, take the opulence of Indra. So sometimes Krishna takes away from his devotee in order to increase the devotee's love. And here's an example where Krishna gives everything. You're too attached to being renounced. I'm going to overload you with opulence. We like that kind of Krishna, yeah. That's really the Supreme Personality guy. So my point in saying this is that in the minute analysis of things, there are these very tiny points. But we shouldn't make a whole mountain out of it. Sudama, I guess you weren't up to the standard. He was Krishna's childhood friend. So similarly, in the case of Maharaj Nabi, I've also thought about what you said, especially when you compare Nabi's case with Atri Muni. So my answer would be that the bhakti is very deep, and sometimes within the purview of pure devotional service, that can be a little microscopic thing that one needs to deal with. And obviously, Nabi dealt with it. So then, because the sages are always looking for a chance to glorify bhakti and glorify devotees, especially Nabi has gone to Badrikashrama with his wife. They've let go of the kingdom. H.H.DEv is king. It's all glorious. So yeah, all glories to Nabi and his pure devotional service. Things are upbeat, you know. I hope that satisfied you a little bit. Yes.
Okay. Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I heard what I felt when you were speaking about your friend 30 years rolling he had. And we were laughing. You said not something to laugh about. So I felt some concern about that. And many of us, we share the concern for the devotees that are like burned down devotees.
Yes.
Try to do something to bring them to a point where they can be more happy or more close to devotional service. But at the same time, we are worried about having this kind of devotees in our temple because they are like a bit of a rotten apple and they can rotten other devotees because they are skeptical or critical. So you can give us a practical.
Yes. Skill is required in dealing with devotees who are very wounded from something that happened in the past. They don't want to let go of their grievances and grudges. And yes, we sympathize certainly with the grievances and grudges. Don't dismiss them because it could very well happen to you. So, at the same time, you don't want those attitudes to hamper young devotees. So skillful management is required. I know myself, for example, I'm often involved in a lot of outreach activities, especially in the first world, trying to bring newcomers to bhakti. As you may know, ISKCON in the first world, that means like North America, Europe, and especially other places of the world that are predominantly English-speaking. The congregations are predominantly fortunate members of fortunate Indians who have saved so many temples in the first world, who are so actively contributing to the activities. But in terms of the others in the population, times have changed, or we have changed, or we're not doing enough, but there's a real problem in reaching out to the non-Indian population in the first world. So naturally, if you are trying to bring newcomers to bhakti in a place where devotees have had some problems, where devotees may feel that they were mistreated, they were not dealt with properly, they were disappointed by leaders. To mix the two together is not very beneficial in the beginning. So we have to keep that in mind. It's like you have an elementary school or a grade school, you know, the first few years in school when kids are 5, 6, or 7. You don't bring a bunch of high school kids into the classroom and say, hey, let's all be together. No, you keep the various grades in school separate because the grades have different mentalities. Of course, there's such a thing as a one-room schoolhouse. The first school I went to, the first 3 grades, was indeed a one-room school with 3 grades in one room, but the teacher has to be very expert then. Outreach requires expertise in building a devotional community because, yes, you have to manage the freshness and newness of the newcomers. Of course, first of all, there has to be some newcomers. Otherwise, you don't have this problem. But we want this problem. We want newcomers. Remember, those of you from the first world, besides the wonderful Indian congregation, we do want some others to come, right? Okay. So, the situation has to be managed. Give the newcomers a chance to grow in bhakti, just like the old quote-unquote burnout cases had. They had their chance. So give the newcomers a chance. If you want to match the cynicism of such jaded older devotees, you can say, look, Prabhu, give them a chance to become burned out. Let them go through their enthusiastic phase, and then later when they burn out, then, but of course we don't want anyone to burn out, and there's no need for anyone to burn out. Guidance is required at every stage of bhakti, both when you're a young devotee and when you're an old devotee. Without guidance, you will hit a speed bump and you'll be thrown out of the vehicle. So those speed bumps let you know that at every stage in bhakti, guidance is required, whether you're young or old. As soon as you start thinking you're an island to yourself, I know everything, been there, done that, seen it all, there's a problem. So yes, we want that problem of there being newcomers. In the first world, we would like to see that problem. If we've got newcomers, what are we going to do? There's older devotees who've had some tough times, and if they mix with the newcomers, they might influence them. First, let's have the problem, and then we'll talk about it. So I was explaining in Mayapur how in the first world, we have simply concentrated upon the juicy, low-hanging fruit of the tree. That's the Indian congregation. And they are auspicious, they're fortunate, they're blessed. But it's time now to start advancing up the tree. We are very appreciative and thankful to the low-hanging fruit. Very juicy, very tasty, very auspicious. But there are other branches on the tree that are not as accessible, but still, this is the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. ISKCON began in the first world, but in terms of outreach in the first world, we have to say, honestly, that ISKCON is floundering in terms of first world outreach, beyond the Indian congregation. So yes, we'd like to see that problem of newcomers. It's a welcome problem. Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. As you mentioned before, that devotional service must be performed in the mood of Krishna Sukha, for the satisfaction of senses of Krishna. So, as in the beginning stages of devotional service, it seems to feel like quite unnatural for doing something for Krishna. There is no quite strong faith. So, can it be performed instead of for the satisfaction of Krishna's senses, rather it's like for the fulfilling the instructions of the spiritual master?
Of course, the only way to connect with the Krishna Sukha Hetu, the cause, the motivation being Krishna's happiness, the only way to connect to that is through the happiness of the parampara. By pleasing Krishna's devotee, that's the best way to give Krishna pleasure. Otherwise, Krishna's not